Okay, so this one is going to demo how to do a turn-based battle system. I've already put some things together in this game. Not a whole lot. I just dragged in some assets. There's no source code associated with this yet, but all I did was I brought in, I put some ground here, and I built some couple of players, a blue one and a purple one. This will be our player. This is going to be the boss that we're fighting. And then I also put a couple of pieces of text on the screen, a health for each one, and then a little status, which is going to tell us what's going to happen. And this is really basic, but it should give you the idea of how to do turn-based. And, like in a one-player way where we simulate another player that we're playing against. And the way this will work is we're going to hit the space bar, which is going to cause our guy to attack this guy and do a random amount of damage. And then later, this guy will attack us back. And we're not going to go crazy with animations or explosions and sounds and things like that, because we can always add all that stuff in based on some of the other tutorials that I've done before. But this is the real purpose of this is to show you how to do a turn-based battle, keep track of your states as you increment through, like, are you attacking or is the opponent attacking? Those are going to be the two main states that we come up with. That way we don't get confused. That way you can't, hit the space bar a million times and keep attacking when it's not your turn. So I want to show you how to keep track of whose turn it is and to make sure that people, can't do things out of sequence and that the battle will progress until one of our healths reaches 0. That's the idea. So we're going to create a piece of source code here, C# script, and we will call it, let's just call it game, how about battle controller. And I've already got this game controller object in our scene. Let me remove this. And it's just an empty object right now with just a game controller on it. Let me just go through all these. So main camera is just default camera. Ground is this thing with a box collider on it. We have our blue and purple. We have a game controller, which is just an empty game object. Remember, you can say create empty, and that will create you an object, and then I renamed it with game controller. We've got a canvas, which was drawn automatically or created automatically when I just right-clicked and went to UI and said text. That gave us a canvas and an event system. And then our canvas I've got set for screen space camera. This render camera I dragged in our main camera over here. And UI scale mode I said scale with screen size. That's all I did in that one. And then I created a couple new text objects and sort of positioned them around the screen. And then the event system that came in when we added the first text element. So that's how we got all this stuff in here. That's where we're at. So this went really quickly. Again, these are all from Glitch the Game. These assets. I just dragged them in, a couple of them, so that we could demo what's going to happen. I brought in this rock. I'm not going to use it. I don't really want to get into throwing things. There's another tutorial that I'll record in a little bit here that shows you how to do like physics for throwing objects and bullets and things like that. So you can combine those two tutorials if you want in order to actually get this guy throwing stuff or this guy throwing stuff back. But for now, we're just going to work on the turn-based attacking. So here's my game controller. There's nothing on it. I'm going to drag over this battle controller script, and we'll be able to edit that thing from scratch. No. So here's our battle controller. A few things that we know that we're going to need. This is our status. This is going to tell us whose turn it is, how much damage. Well, actually, I'll just say whose turn it is and give some indication of what you need to do in order to do that. So it'll say, like, if it's this guy's turn, it'll say it's your turn, hit the space bar to attack. And if it's this guy's turn over here, it's going to say your opponent is attacking, please wait, or something like that. So that's what our status is. And then we have these two health values. You can make this fancy, like with a health bar, or it could even be more than that. It could be more than health. It could be how much attack you have or how much defense you have, that sort of stuff. But for right now, we're just going to say how much health you have left. And those are going to be here. So we have these 3 text objects that are going to need to change at some point during our little game. So I'm going to create some variables for them. We are going to be using the UI stuff, so we have to include Unity engine.ui that will allow us to modify text on the screen. And we'll make some public variables, text. We'll have status, text, public text, have player 1 text, oops, and public text player 2 text. And these are going to be our pieces of information that are on the screen. So now after I've saved that and I go back to game controller, now all these variables have popped up over here because they're public. And so to assign them, this is my status text object here. So on my game controller selected, I'm just going to drag this text object over here. That's going to allow us to change it in code. Text 1 is our player 1, so I'll drag player text 1 into the player 1 spot. And then the same thing for text 2, I'll drag it over here to the player 2 spot. And so now all of these things are linked up. And when I go over to my code, now we can refer to these things as we need to. Another couple other things that we're going to need here, we'll need an int, a couple of ints that represent how much health each player has. So we'll say int player 1 health, or player 1 health equals 100. We'll start at 100, and int player 2 health equals 100. So remember, there are two different things. This one is the text representation. We can give a little more description to it, like health colon 100 or whatever. This is the actual value that the player has. And then the other thing that we need to keep track of is whose turn is it? This is really going to be a simple one. There's really only two states. Either player 1 is attacking or player 2 is attacking. That's it. Those are the only two things. And you can use this sort of concept for any kind of turn-based game. And it'll be more complicated if you have more players. But if you only have 2 players, we just need to keep track of whose turn it is right now. And so by doing that, we're just going to use a Boolean. And we'll say player 1 turn equals true. So we'll start with player 1 being the active player. So essentially what we need to do is create a couple functions that allow us to either play as our player using the keyboard or to wait and sort of fake the secondary player doing something. And so we're going to create two separate sort of code paths that can take place, whether we're waiting for keyboard input or we're waiting for our computer-controlled player to do something. And it's really easy to say, well, maybe we don't really need all these different states for the second player because the computer's just doing it anyways. But we're going to put them in there because it'll make it look like a real player. It'll make him look like he's making some decisions. We can put some delays in there and that sort of stuff. So we're going to have two functions, start player 1 turn and start player 2 turn. And maybe these aren't the right words. Maybe this is start keyboard player turn and this is start AI player turn or something like that. But if you're going to expand on this, you may want to name these things differently just to give a more accurate representation of what's going on. Because who's to say that player 1 is always somebody typing at the keyboard and player 2 is always an AI opponent? But for this example, I'm trying to do it as simple as possible so I can sort of isolate these things. And so we're going to assume that player 1 is typing at the keyboard and player 2 is some AI that we're going to generate. All right, so when we start player 1 turn, what should we do? We're gonna say we need to update the text. So our status text.text is going to say something like your turn, press space to fight, something like that. And in the player 2 turn, maybe we'll say something like, let's update the text, and we'll say opponent turn, please wait, or something. Okay, so we'll kind of build these sort of in parallel, but we'll come back and do most of this player 2 stuff later, but I just wanted to show you that was coming. So now the status, the text has said, okay, it's your turn, press space to fight. And then what do we need to do? We need to wait until the player presses space. That's the idea. And so inside of our update loop, just like we've done other keyboard events, we'll say if input dot get key down, key code dot space. Then we want to do something, and we could say something like player 1 fight. Okay, whatever that is. And we'll make a function that does that. Here. Okay, so player 1 fight. Do something. Whatever we're going to do, we're going to attack and do some damage and that sort of stuff. Now, the other thing that we might want to do here is switch players after we're done fighting. We'll fix that in a sec. We'll write the code that goes in there as well. I'll just put that here. But that's the idea. So if the space is pressed, we're going to have player 1 fight, whatever that means. We'll define it in a sec. And then we want to switch players. That way our second player can do something. The other part of this that's really important, and if we don't have this, things are going to function really bad, is we also have to make sure that it is the player 1's turn before we even check to see if he's hitting the space bar. Because if it's the other player's turn, and the first player is bashing on the space button, we basically just need to ignore it. So what we're going to do is say if player 1 turn and. Alright, so the first check that's going to take place is it this player's turn? If it's not, we're not even going to bother doing this piece of code over here because it doesn't matter anyways, it's an and. And so this is going to prevent us from hitting the space bar essentially when we shouldn't. So here we're going to call our player 1 fight because it is our turn. And there is actually going to be a window, the way I'm going to code this, that maybe you could get 2 spacebar presses in there, maybe not. Probably not. So, but anyways, yeah, maybe there's a way to do it. But for the most part, we're not going to worry about that. So it is our turn. We press the space. We want to fight. So what do we do in our fight function? We want to attack the other player, and we want to subtract some of player 2's health. How are we going to attack, and how much damage are we going to do? Well, it could be dependent on whatever weapon you have selected or whatever potion you threw or whatever it is. But for right now, we're just going to say all attacks are kind of equal, but we're going to do a random amount of damage. So we start with 100 health. Whenever we attack, we're going to do a random amount of damage between 25 and 35. And so we can say something like int damage equals random dot range from 25 to 35. And this is our random amount of damage. And so now we can say something like player 2 health minus equals damage. And then let's just do a double check here. We don't want to do negative damage, so we'll say something like if player 2 health less than or equal to 0, then player 2 health equals 0. And this is also the case for, I win. Because I've done so much damage. But for now, we'll just kind of put that in there. And then after we do that, we need to switch players, right? So we've done our damage between 25 and 35. And we need to do a couple things. Now, it's time to switch players. And what we want to do in our switch players method is a couple things. We want to update our display, and so we are going to update the health value of both players, and then we are going to also change players by doing this, by setting our boolean here. That way this sort of business will always work. So inside of switch players, we're going to say player 1 text equals health plus player 1 health, and then the same thing for player 2. Player 2 health, and we also want to say player 1 turn not equals player 1 turn. So this is going to switch it. This is going to toggle it back and forth from true to false, true to false, true to false. And that's how we're going to switch players. So it doesn't matter if right now player 1 is the active player, then when we do this, it's going to set this back to false, which means it's not the active player. If player 2 is the active player when we first come in to switch players, that means that player 1 turn is false, and then we flip it by this business here, and so after this line, then player 1 turn is true, and that means it's player 1's turn. So that's how we'll do that. And now we got to figure out what to do next. So if it's player 1's turn, then we start player 1 turn. Otherwise, we will start player 2. All right. So this is important. This is where we keep track of what we're supposed to do next, and then based on that, we're going to call this function. We've already handled all of the logic for once we call start player 1 turn, because we come on here, we update our text, we fight, and that's it. So now when we start player 2 turn, this one's going to be a little bit different because we're not actually watching for somebody to press any buttons on the keyboard. We want to have this AI player sort of fake like it's making a decision, because we could go really quickly. Like we could go through this as fast as the computer can go, but we don't really want to do that because that's not normally how things work. So we want to pretend like the other player is thinking about things. So when we come into start player 2 turn, we update our text, which is true. But then the other thing that we want to do is we want to wait just a little bit. We want to do our we want to take our second player's turn, but we also want to wait like a couple seconds so it looks like he's thinking. So we'll come down here, and the way we're going to do that is we are going to have the player 2 turn is going to have another function, which is going to be an IE numerator, which means we're kind of going to wait on it a little bit. It allows us to sort of throw this off to the side for a little bit. I'll show you more about that in a sec. We'll call it player 2 turn. And inside of this thing, because it's an IE numerator, we can do a delay. So we'll do a yield, and the way you do that is a yield return, new, wait for seconds. And the amount of time that we're going to wait is, let's just wait a random amount, random.range, I don't know, between 5 and 15 seconds. So when we get into this thing, and we'll call it, we haven't even called this function yet, but we will in a sec. Once we get in here, we're going to wait for 15 seconds, and then we will say player 2 fight. So this little delay is going to sort of fake like the guy is thinking about hitting the spacebar or not, even though it's he has no option to do that. And then we need to start this function, so we'll do it right here. When we start player 2 turn, we will do a start coroutine, and we'll say player 2 turn. All right, so by doing it this way, it's going to allow this function to sort of just hang here for a while and not block everything. It's going to go out in space, and then as soon as this random timer has elapsed, it's going to come back and call player 2 fight. And so that's what we'll write next. So next we'll have a void player 2 fight. And inside of here, it's going to look very similar to player 1 fight. In fact, it's almost going to be identical. So I'm just going to copy and paste. And we're going to do our damage, but we're going to adjust the player 1's health, player 1 health, and instead of I winning, if this is the case, then it's going to be opponent wins. And it shouldn't be that. It should be a sad face. All right, yeah, and then let's see. So then we come down here, player 2 fight. We do all this stuff. That's good. And then what are we missing? We don't have a switch players. There we go. So now, when it's our player, we start our player 2 turn. We update our text. We then start a coroutine for player 2 turn. This is going to wait a random amount of seconds between 5 and 15. Then we call player 2 fight, which is this. We do damage to player 1. Then we return here and we switch players, which will update all of our text on the screen. We flip our player's turn. And then depending on which player it is, we either start player 1 turn or start player 2 turn, and it just keeps going and going and going. I think the only part that we're missing out of this is if we ran this right now, I think we would have a little bit of an issue because this would not show up right away. So I'm going to add in our start method here, a start player 1 turn, just to kick things off. And that's going to update this. We've already initialized our player 1 turn variable to true, which was going to allow us to do this, do our player 1 fight, our switch players. And so I think that's what we're going to do. So we'll just initialize everything by saying start player 1 turn. And I think that should be it. Let's go back and take a look at what's happening inside of Unity right now. Oh boy. Big problems. Oh, it wants me to do this. Player 1 turn equals not player 1 turn. Fine with me. And that was happy. So yeah, that was good. Typed all this code and only had one issue. So yeah, same thing. We're just going to flip it. Player 1 turn equals not player 1 turn. And we've got our code is linked up to this thing. We've got our canvas with all of our stuff on it. So let's see what happens when we run. Okay, so here we know that we called our start player 1 turn because it says your turn, press space to fight. And then this went down to 67. Now opponent turn, please wait. And this is our random 5 to 15 second wait. There we go. So now he did the same amount of damage, which is interesting. But now let's do another fight. We went down to 36 health on this guy. And let's see what our damage is when he fights back. Okay, we're winning. And all right, now he's down to 11. Now we're waiting for him to attack us back. 10. Okay, so this, we should be able to kill him off with this next one, I hope. Let's see. Yeah, there we go. We just won. So yeah, now we can put a lot more code in here dealing with win conditions and victory conditions, that sort of stuff. We could also add more little substates to this, like when this guy is attacking, there could be a thinking state, and then an attacking state where we throw fireballs, and then there's a reveal state where we show an animation of how much damage he actually did, and then there's some sort of tally state or something like that where we do some animation on our health to make it look a little bit better as it goes down. And then we switch turns. So, we did a really simple two-state thing here where it's either my turn or my opponent's turn. But you can break this down into as many substates as you need to make it look, really good and sound good, player sounds, player animations, and get through it that way. So, but this does show you how to do a turn-based battle system. But I would encourage you to make it a little bit better than this by showing animations and stuff like that. So I think that's all I wanted to show for this one.